A very good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for coming down and making out an hour. We will try to make it short so that you have more time later on before your lunch. So just to introduce and what are we going to cover in this particular session, I'm Manu Khetan. I manage rolling arrays operations and I'm based out of Singapore. That's David Chin, one of our key customers. David is CHRO of Biosensors International, and David's company has adopted SuccessFactors for the last couple of years, and we have been supporting them, and of course, as a solution provider to them to make a streamlined function for them in the HR. Okay, so the topic of the session today, how to measure efficiency of HR transformation by linking it to bottom line of your company. So the topic that when David and I were discussing actually that, okay, what should be our topic and what could be the value add that we could share from our experience of interacting with David's company and David's team and general customers in the HR space, is that there was a time when HR was considered as a cost center. About 3-4 years back, most of our sessions actually, and most of my speaking sessions, and I remember Samir was there a couple of years before, and the session, the topic name was how to make the right justification to your CHROs for the right budget. And I think in the last few years, we have really evolved. We don't make a justification to the top management for the right budget, because I think that is adopted. And now there is a lot of budget for HR. And the reason is actually, I think it is evolved and adopted as a profit center instead of a cost center. And why it is a profit center? Because we are the ones who will manage, who will sell, maintain, operate, strategize. We do everything for the company. And the company makes money because of the human capital. And human capital is actually run by the HR. So that's pretty much the reason why we say it is the bottom line. And of course, it drives the top line. And we do it right. And if there is a streamlined HR transformation that can happen with the top leader at the top as a CHRO, it actually can drive a lot of benefit and a lot of profitability for any organization. And that's where the bottom line comes in the picture. So that's pretty much the start of it and the context of what we're going to do. I will request David actually to present about biosensors, and then we basically contextualize and go from there. Yeah.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Now, Manu and I have never done this before. So, you forgive us if we don't get it all right. And also, we may not always agree. I mean, he's a partner, but we're independent partners working together, right? So we don't always see eye to eye. And I think what we wanted to do was to just share a couple of learnings. Now, hopefully, this is an interactive session, so I would love it if you ask questions, okay? And we can take the conversation in places that interest you and add value to you. So, like Manu said, I think we're just a little bit of an introduction in terms of biosensors.
Yeah, you can use this one.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Thanks. Technology. Okay. Biosensors, just as a company, it is a Singapore-based company. We're listed on the stock exchange of Singapore. It is a medical technologies company. We are in the cardiovascular business, so we have proprietary drug we developed internally, and we produce heart stents that go into people's bodies, right? And it's an innovative field, right? There's constant technology development, there's constant innovation, there's constant movement in the industry space. Our largest markets, we are based in Singapore. Actually, we started in California, right? But thanks to some very supportive encouragement from the Singapore government and the EDB and those, they convinced us to move here. But it was also part of a strategic decision in terms of focusing on emerging markets and growth markets, being in this part of the world. Because most of the competitors in the space, in fact, all of our big competitors are US multinationals. We're the only non-US multinational in the top 4, top 5 of what we do. We are a leader in emerging markets. Because we got there early, we have some very, very nice positions. We have and nearly half the market share in Indonesia, for example, which is a growing market, right? And that's typical in a lot of the emerging markets where we exist. Top line, we're about 300 million US at the moment. Our aspiration is to get to $1 billion plus in the next 3 to 4 years, right? We've got to 300 million in roughly 4 years, right? From basically being a startup, going IPO to going, so we've had this huge, rapid growth rate. But what that means is that as an organization, we have to transform and we have to adapt, which is kind of what's here. We are a relatively small company in terms of our population. It's 1,300 employees. However, the company I used to work for, which was about 13,000 employees, is almost in parallel in terms of complexity, because even though I have 1,300 employees, I have them spread across 30 plus countries, right? So when I deploy systems, it has to work equally well in Italy as it does in Brazil, as it does in China, as it does in Singapore. So I have to service employees of the world. And one of the things that I'm sure most of you relate to is having one employee in Brazil is sometimes as difficult as having 100 employees in Brazil. You still have to set up Brazil. Doesn't matter how many people are there. So geographical complexity, even though we're a relatively small organization, is a feature of what we have to deal with. We are based in primarily Europe, China, you can see. And we have big manufacturing centers in Singapore, China, and believe it or not, Israel, right? So you may say, why Israel? Because part of our strategy as a business is growing through M&A. And one of the things we did was buy an Israeli technology company, which is a leader in that space. That is a recurrent theme in terms of how we're going to grow as a business. And that creates some very, very specific, and I'll talk to it later, in terms of how that affects how I think about the infrastructure, the architecture, and what I do from a HR systems point of view, because M&A is a feature of how we're going to grow. Widely distributed sales offices, including in multiple cities in multiple countries, mix of cultures, language, and background. And historically, as an organization, we've been regionally focused, but a big part of the push in the organization is to go global and to really enable global functions and global capabilities. And we'll talk more about that later on. Okay? As I said, we are a successful startup, but we're like a teenager who now needs to grow up. You know, we have had disparate organizations. A lot of our strategy was to go to a market and just sell as much as you can, right? The markets are maturing. We have much more complex organizations. We need to be now more systematic and process-oriented in terms of how we manage, because you get it wrong in a market, you can mess up the business, right? Whereas before, we were just chasing growth, right? We need to align activities and people, right? That's critical for us. And it's not something that historically we've been good at, right? Because all we did was go out there and sell as much as we can, right? Now we have to be much more focused, because we can't afford to fund and resource growing everywhere all at the same time. We have to start making choices. And if we're going to get good at M&A, we also have to be more organized in terms of how we integrate and run collective activities. Okay? Big part of it is maximizing performance, right? We face an environment where prices are under pressure. Anybody face that environment? Prices are under pressure. How do you maximize revenues? The good news for us is that generally the markets are still growing volume-wise, right? So there's growth in the markets. So it's better than being in shrinking markets with price under pressure. But you still have to make sure you're doing the right things. How do we make sure that our people are focused on the right things so we can maximize the performance? And as I said, M&A is a big feature of what we need to do, right? So how do we make sure that the company and HR is M&A ready, okay? And then, of course, building a culture of excellence, right? You notice there's nothing in there about shared services. There's nothing in there about outsourcing. There's nothing. All of those things are discussions and considerations, but they are discussions and considerations because of outcomes that we're trying to drive, right? So it's very important we understand the outcomes, and then the activities that we do are based around delivering those outcomes. Anyway, so that's about Biosensors. Let Manu talk a little bit about rolling arrays.
While I present this slide, I will simply do a summary that the fact that David is here, I'm presenting with him, And I met up with him last one year before when we didn't start the project. And now when we have completed the project and he's pretty much here talking with me. So that gives the testimony that is the intentions with which we start a project and complete it. And that being Biosensors adopting most of the SuccessFactors modules for bringing HR transformation. However, as you can see that we started around 2009, headquartered in Singapore, and this is the 7th year that we are running. We've got about 50 plus large and medium-sized clients across Southeast Asia. We got the SAP Gold Partnership status basically 3 years before, and now we have offices in 6 countries, headquartered in Singapore, and with offices in Malaysia, Hong Kong, Philippines, India, Indonesia. So that's pretty much, we've completed about 100 plus projects together in the last few years, and hopefully this number is going to double in the next couple of years. And I do a presentation with one of you as my customer next year in Success Connect. Okay, this slide is more of a crisp and crux summary of what we've done together. However, this looks like a very trivial slide, and each one of you would actually adopt from a vendor perspective what a solution provider can provide and what HR transformation, an organization which is ready for an HR transformation would love to have it in their system actually. However, we will come and do a summary of this slide when we are done with the session, where those 3 magic steps and the experiences that we've had with Biosensors and with our other customers, we share and then come to conclude for it, so that it gives a real context of what we try to achieve in it. However, from a top perspective, yes, of course, it starts from the beginning of discovery until the closure of the project, where you can actually achieve and measure the bottom line. So that's pretty much basically the summary of it, but we will come to it and probably revisit each and every element of it and how we did it. Okay, this comes, we come to the main part of our session actually, where we try and see exactly how we can table whatever experience we have in general in interacting with our customers and making it happen for them. I think the most important first aspect, which I think is the key when we lay the foundation of any HR project, is discovering HR processes. I would say, okay, this is a very, very trivial line, and everybody would say that, so what? Yes, of course we have to discover the HR processes. But I think from the total HR project that we've done and seeing the trend, what is happening and what has been evolving, I would basically put 3 elements to it. And we will basically try to detail it together, and David can add and contextualize it basically from his own adoption perspective. The first one is actually measuring the worldwide HR trend, which is independent of any organization's culture, any organization's processes, or any processes which is there in an existing product. When I say worldwide trend, I simply take an example of directional learning. So we're talking about social learning a few years back. And now basically we have reached to a stage where we are actually not talking about social learning, we're talking about directional learning. What is directional learning? An organization, let's say, I take example of Biosensors, 1,300 people, about 200 of them are subject matter experts. We've got a lot of knowledge between those 200 people. Can you imagine that particular knowledge, what is the best way to retain it? If you create a lot of content, it has to be AICC and Scrum, which all of us know takes a lot of time to create. If you do social learning, it gets unstructured, and it gets lost, you wouldn't know. Now, the only way is basically to make that particular knowledge in a structured content fashion, which probably could be a structured course. Now, when you have to create that particular course from a subject matter expertise, you need to make sure that particular person is not investing time in creating that course. And it happens automatically, number one. Second is, the people actually who are wanting to get that particular knowledge will know those subject matter experts, because they are the ones actually they are day-to-day learning from them. And they will take that course. And when they take that course through a structured thing, it will be tracked. And when it is tracked, you can actually measure how the organization basically is getting benefited from it. And that's typically called a directional learning pattern, which is nothing but a trend that has come out. This is one example of it. There are tons and tons of examples of the current evolution that we are doing in terms of, you must have heard how performance management processes are changing and everything is happening. Now, that is typically when the discovery is happening and when brainstorming is happening between a solution provider and the companies which are adopting HR talent management processes, that element of, okay, what are the trends and do we have to incorporate that in the transformation exercise, and at the back of their mind is extremely important. I feel if that is there and we carry it over, that's where in the end, when the project is finished, you will feel that, okay, what is the value that it brought out? And you will proudly be able to say, yes, there was some distinction to this particular project because of this, because of the trends and everything basically that we adopted. That's the first aspect of it.
Okay, so, let me add in. So the next slide, if we go to the next slide. The next slide is this. So you've all seen this before, right? This is a classic thing. You go through the employee life cycle, you look at all the processes, and you map it and that sort of thing. And the slide before was titled, this slide is titled Discovering HR Processes. And I think that this is something that you have to do, but I have a particular take on this, right? Frankly, you can use any model. This slide's not special per se, right? My point, though, is that when you are doing an implementation or when you are doing an adoption, you need to think very, very, very carefully about where you start and which process you pick. The danger or the pitfall that I see is, and I've gone through this experience myself. I've lived through the ERP world. I've lived through multiple implementations, mega million-dollar, and all the rest of it, is we start in the wrong place because we start with this white sheet of paper and we say, okay, let's start by mapping the world. We'll start by mapping all the HR processes because we have to figure out how to take what we have manually or on paper and convert that into technology. One of the things that I've learned the hard way with the scars on the back is it's the wrong place to start. Because I will tell you something, your board and your senior management are not interested. The only reason that doing that becomes interesting to them is if you can say, I can drive out cost in the organization. I need to create shared services. I need to optimize all the rest of it. And I think one of the things that we as HR professionals need to get better at is saying, in this process map, strategically, where do we want to start? And strategically, which of our processes is a pain point for the organization, not a pain point for HR? Right? Our pain point for HR is managing P files, and there's incorrect data, payroll goes wrong, all that sort of thing. From a business perspective, from a senior management perspective, from a board perspective, they expect all that to happen. That's for HR to sort out and fix. What's a pain point? So in our case, in Biosensors, the place I started was not payroll, was not employee self-services. The place I started was goal setting. I started with goal setting. Why? Because the pain point in my organization is I've got 1,300 people distributed over 30 countries. Most of the time, they never see, the senior management. They may not see their manager that often. How do I make sure all those people are doing the right thing? How do I make sure that the person in Indonesia, the person in Brazil, the person in Italy understands where we are going in our product positioning and our new product launches, and that we want to drive adoption and transition of the generations of our products, for example. And I do that through setting the right goals and the right KPIs. And when I sat down with the board, and when I sat down with my senior management team, my CEO, my CFO, I didn't do this whole classic, I've got a 5-year adoption plan of success factors, and at the end of this, my ROI will be X number of dollars, and I will save this by reducing HR headcount. And I have done that in previous lives, right? The way I did it was to say, here are our list of real pain points, right, with our organization. Here are the things that are going to happen in the next 2-3 years as part of our 5-year long-range plan. And here's how what we want to do in terms of a HR transformation and HR technology is directly applicable to those points in time, right? So I picked specific processes. I didn't sell an entire package. I said, okay, you need to get some basics underway to start with. But after that, you need specific items that will enable you to drive value, right? So this piece about HR processes, right, you need to think through very carefully, because you don't necessarily want to start by mapping the world, and you want to start by thinking which processes are going to give you the greatest ROI, not from the HR perspective, but from the business perspective when you execute against that. That's fundamentally important. And that's how you get the commitment, not just to fund the budget, but also to execute the change. Because you need your senior management to go along. And if they're going to say, well, you know what, employee self-services is great because it's going to, but actually I don't want my salespeople doing the employee, I want them out there selling, it undermines your argument. So you have to figure those things through first when you're looking at the process. Okay?
And at that point of time, this particular aspect, when we are discovering the processes, the first element which David contextualized, I would say when you are maximizing the product that you are adopting, and at the same time, if you are adopting a cloud product actually, and we proudly say that SuccessFactors is probably in Gartner and it's a tier 1 product actually, it's got tons of best practices inside it, and then you have to make sure that you leverage on those and actually make them transformational. And that's where I think the example which David just mentioned is cascading the existing KPIs and competency libraries, mapping it to the existing processes of a company, and then using them immediately, which typically gets lost if you buy a system and the processes are there, but the elements of competencies, the KPIs are not mapped, and the system is not able to cascade it to every single employee of the organization. And that's where I would say basically that while discovering the processes, one, about adopting it, mapping it, taking a look at the worldwide trend, however, maximizing the existing best practices of the product that you choose. And that's something basically which you should keep in mind while you're discovering. And I think the last point about discovering the process would be to preserve the uniqueness of your own processes. I mean, while we're doing cloud adoption, we say that adopt the product as it is. However, there is always a uniqueness. And HR being industry agnostic, but there is always a uniqueness of your processes, which typically should be discussed, brainstormed, and maximized to be able to map it to the product that you buy. It should not be that basically we give away those uniqueness, because that's probably make your particular organization unique, and you won't be able to measure the ROI if you do not embed those. And everybody basically is looking for those processes, but the magic is that mapping those to the product that you are buying in order to be able to map it closest. And that's where I think the discovery is absolutely important and becomes important if we keep these 3 elements in mind and then go for it. And then, of course, we come to the next part of it, which is pretty much simple. However, it is very much connected to the discovery. The outcome of the discovery is that making sure that whatever we discovered, trends, the packaged product, and your unique processes are mapped to the roles of every single HR function, be it line manager, be it employee, be it the HR shared service, be it the outsourcing partner, or be it the shared center of excellence. And if you map those, that's where you maximize the product competencies, put those KPIs in place, and then only you will be able to measure the final outcome when the project is finished. And after 2 years, if your top management asks, we invested about $5 million in HR transformation, what is the outcome? If you have this particular process mapped right at the beginning, you will have the answers automatically. It looks very simple, but I must insist that this is the real magic. If we keep this particular aspect and stick to it, it will really make wonders when you're going for your HR transformation. And that's where it looks very simple. That's where basically we try to put in the processes are there, the functions are there, and then we have to look at when we have completed this particular alignment process, have we done that? And have we done that correctly? And when we have done that correctly, we should have that confidence that it is going to get final best. Maybe David can.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think we all know this, right? As part of any transformation process, we need to have a serious review of what are HR roles in the process. Having gone through a couple, one of my biggest challenges is the HR people. Sometimes they're the people who don't want to change. The business is loving change, desiring change, and we're the ones who do it. I remember one of the two transformations ago, so one that I worked on previously, one of the major outcomes from the transformation is we finally got a job description for a business partner. Okay, it took, and I inherited it, but apparently they'd been trying to work on it for 18 months, but we finally got that. Because it goes to the heart of what does HR do. And one of the things that I want to share as a little bit of at least a personal insight, and I think it's great news for the HR community, is that HR processes have rapidly matured, and the technology nowadays embeds that knowledge and understanding into it, right? And I think that as the HR community, sometimes we get very caught up into, we need to do it this way in Malaysia, and we need to do it this way in Japan, and we need to do it this way in China, or this way in Spain, and that sort of thing. And yes, there are uniquenesses. The great thing, and the reason that I am a fan of the cloud, is that because the cloud goes into those countries already, I basically steal other people's learning. Because I basically it's different from a product pack where you do it as a customization. But what I know, for example, is that if you can run these processes in Spain, right, out of SuccessFactors or Employee Central and that sort of thing, if these are the data fields, if this is the way the process can work, and I can't understand that, that's my fault, not the product's fault. Because other customers are using it that way in Spain, i.e. they've sorted it out, they've worked it through. So one of the things for me is that I focus my team and my function and my department not about figuring out all the process, but saying how do we take what is there and how do we make it best work for us? Because that saves me time rather than remapping everything, and it focuses my team on outcomes, not the process. Because what you want them to be doing is spending time focused on what is being delivered. So having mature technology, now that wasn't always true, right? And the product sets we had to deal with, if you go back 5, 10 years, weren't always there. But I think what I see now is the products are beginning to mature to that level where you can say, let me see, to be able to take as much from the product as I can and make it work for me rather than re-engineering the product. Because at the end of the day, the business just is interested in the outcome. They just want to get to outcome. They're not worried so much about how your process and your technology does it, right? So I think if you are looking at the product set, if you're looking at the cloud, that's one of the things to bear in mind. And like I said at the beginning of the comment, was usually the people I have to fight the most with to get this done is the HR team. Because we always do it this way. I said, no, hang on a minute, let's rethink that. Let's go for simplicity. Let's go for ease of use. The business is just focused on the outcome, not the process.
We come for the third step, which is again basically in connection with what we have been discussing. There was a time when, I would say basically about 3-4 years back, when I used to speak to my customers, and they say, what is the value that you could bring in? And we're talking to the big boys, and if you have to implement our system, what is it that basically I will say that is the USP of your organization? I would say that we talk the HR language. But again, as I say, it was a few years back, and it has evolved now. And what do we say basically, and what customers actually are wanting to hear from us? I would say that time they used to say we talk the HR language because we were just not talking as a SI, as a system integrator, but we are talking as an actual HR transformation company which is just focusing on the IT solution. But I would say basically that in the last few years, the way HR has grown out of the entire process trends, out of the entire new concepts coming out from social learning, directional learning, I would say the main aspect is we do not start an HR project from a normal blueprinting exercise, even though we talk the HR language. We actually have to start from an absolute process discovery perspective, role mapping perspective, and then bring it into the picture. So to say that if a consulting company is doing a HR process consulting for you, and even if there is a gap of about 6 months in order to automate it, the entire work typically, from my experience and from what I heard from my team and from my customers, is wasted. Because the processes are changing and the entire work becomes redundant. And that's where the most important aspects come into the play, that when you're doing a process discovery and you're doing alignment, you have to do the automation together. And that's where I would say orchestrating the processes, roles, and best practices with an integrated HR software comes into play. Not only just talking about the HR language as an HR SI, however, bringing it all together, making it tightly coupled with the glue, that making that HR consulting and HR automation together. And trust me, if you do that together, the project actually becomes successful. And if you don't do it, you will be able to complete the project, But the value, then again, basically I insist that the bottom line, you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to measure it because you have not aligned it. You wouldn't be able to maximize it because you have not thought about the different trends, the maximization of the product, and talking about your own unique processes. Rather, you just basically complete a project in a quick fix through a rapid solution framework. Okay, we've bought a product, we go into it, we map our processes, and we come to it. But in the end, you wouldn't be able to leverage it. And that's where actually this is the orchestration that we've tried to put together. However, again, looks very simple, but again, the value and the thought behind this is what I'm trying to explain it to you, which really basically goes a long way, where you have all these automation processes, you got your own processes, and you map it. This is a very traditional standard slide, but each and every single customer will actually have their own unique slide when they map in this particular fashion. And I feel actually that if we were to do it, and as head of HRs and HR managers of your organization, if you basically believe it and if you go through this journey, I think it'll really pay a lot. I think this is a summary of whatever we've discussed. Actually, I will let David basically to explain it to you.
So I mean, I think we've been through a number of the pieces there, and we haven't had questions yet, so we should have questions. But just a comment on the last slide. I mean, when you talk about this, right? The important thing that I've learned in doing cloud implementations is your SI is very, very key, okay? And Manu and rolling arrays was not always our SI, okay? I've had bad experiences, even within our implementations, right? So what I find is in the cloud world, because the product is continually developing, I have to look at Manu and I have to have an expectation of him that he is keeping up and his team is keeping up, because the product I am adopting is evolving. It's not a single point of adoption. In the old ERP world, you do configuration, it's all made and you put it in and it's static, and then you decide whether you want to put in the service pack. In the cloud world, it is different, because the product is evolving, and whether I can get the value of that evolution depends on the SI. Why? And because my people won't be able to keep up all the time with all the evolutions, right? So I have to be able to look at the SI, and I have to be able to look through the SI at SAP, right? Because they have to keep us abreast of what's changing, because we often get taken along with that process. Right? And if we're going to get value from being taken along with that process, it is fundamentally important that that be a very, very collaborative relationship. And that both the SI as well as the technology provider, the solution provider, understand what I'm looking for, right? And I have to put that demand on them in terms of my expectations, because we're tied in. Otherwise, what happens is when my 3-year subscription is up, is actually relatively easy to flip over, right? Question, okay.
Bill Cudick, David. You've obviously been through on-premise implementations. You've just been describing a cloud implementation. Mm-hmm. Could you talk more about the difference for the people in the room who've perhaps not been through both and only been through the first, in terms of staffing, in terms of the continuing relationship? Sounds like, in my mind, on-prem, you go live and the SI disappears. Mm-hmm. Sounds to me like on the cloud, they stick around. Things of that sort.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, there are a couple of fundamental differences, right? I think, like I mentioned, the ongoing relationship with the SI is very, very important, right? And that has to work, right? Because you aren't doing a single-time implementation. I think your implementation strategy is also different, right? Part of that relates to your roles. I think when we went, so in the ERP world, my approach was always region/location, right? You do rollouts, a lot of it is region by region, location by location. In what I had to do, and with this organization and with the cloud, it is much easier to go live with functionality on a global basis. So literally, when I did performance management and KPIs, we turned it on globally on day one, right? And that's very important, and that's very important for the business, because it enables you to be able to say, we can align the entire organization, the people in Israel, the people in Spain, the people in China, all from day one. The piece that has always undermined that conversation in the past was if you're doing this phased rolling. So I contrast what we did in HR versus what we're doing in the finance organization. So the finance organization in our business is still on-prem. And they are doing the classic location by location by location. But what that means is they have to do a lot of work, and they have a BDW to consolidate data and produce reporting and all the rest of it. Because I'm on cloud, I don't need to do that. I do away with that layer. For me in the M&A world, right, because M&A is part of my strategy, that's also incredibly important because when we bought the Israeli company, I can have them up and running in a couple of weeks. We still haven't got their financials on because we have to do hardware and all the rest of it. So the cloud provides me the ability to do rapid execution. The caveat and the trade-off is that I have to accept a higher degree of standardization, and I have to be, that's why I said that thing about focus on what is your outcome. Because if I get into, I need it to work this way in Israel, I need it to work this way in Spain, I need it to work, and I start creating that complexity, one is my acceptance of using the cloud goes down, and two, my time frame to implementation goes up. So part of running with the cloud is saying, let's go for the 80-20. What is the 20% that adds the biggest volume, biggest value to my business? Get that in, right? And then we'll work through the rest of the 80 as we go along, right? So the thinking that you have, right, in terms of an on-premise delivery versus implementation versus a cloud implementation, I think is fundamentally different. You're looking for standardization, you're looking for rapid deployment, and you try and deploy globally because that's where you can drive value and benefit and ROI. Okay?
Yeah. Another interesting point to add to David's answer and your question is that in cloud, when David mentioned that we are doing a functionality rollout and we are not doing a location rollout, is cloud is meant to be global. On-premise is not meant to be global. The kind of logistics you have to map when you are doing a global rollout in an on-premise is humongous. It's mammoth. And you can't do it. And if you have to do it, you can't actually concentrate on the functionality. Because of cloud, you don't have to take care of that at all. And you just think about the process, roll it out. And the reason why you are able to roll it out, the benefit is, it is a global process that you're rolling out. And you're not concentrating on one particular location and then changing another process for another location because it doesn't suit. You do a common harmonized blueprint in the beginning and then you do a rollout. I think that's pretty much another aspect of it. It is actually very much linked to the IT infra problem. However, basically it is a process win that you achieve because of this fact actually. And no matter where we reach in the technology, on-premise in the end basically will be installed and then you do a lot of proxy generation and then basically you make a clones of it in order to be able to do the performance and all. I come from IT actually, so I have to use these words. But honestly, actually, in the first 5 years of my career, I was just doing on-premise, and most of the team is just battling between these logistics actually, which is completely evaporated ever since the cloud has evolved, and customers feel that yes, there is a lot of value in it.
And just one last quick comment on that. Because of the focus and the emphasis on standardization, you have to have this owned by HR management, not HRIS. Okay, a lot of implementation. So when you do implementations, on-premise implementations, a lot of the heavy lifting gets done by the HR technology team, the IS team. Because you're going for standardization, a lot more heavy lifting needs to be done by HR management. So for example, what I did, right, when we did our implementation is I brought my regional heads of HR, locked them in a room for a week, and I worked through the configuration workbook with them. Because we needed to standardize things like definitions. If you leave it to HRIS will not get it done and you'll never get a global implementation, right? Because every region will be telling you, you need this different, you need this different, you need this different. So when you go with a cloud solution, because standardization is such a premium, you actually need the HR management, right? The people who own HR for your locations directly involved in it, and that requires a level of HR leadership. So you need to put people in a room, bang their heads together, and make them agree. Because if they don't agree, right, it becomes very, very challenging to deploy on the cloud.
Okay. We've come towards the end of it, so it's fine. We just take another couple of minutes and then we finish it off. I would, as much as I want to show this slide, just to explain exactly that when we are talking about our experience and what has been happening, these are the few recent customers actually in progress, completed, and expected actually that we are currently talking, and that is why we were able to form an opinion and able to advise to the customers that okay, what's going on, what's going wrong, and how we should do it. I mean, some of them are here. I can see Brian here. Our recent project actually in Coca-Cola that we have been talking to them and started off. And of course, MEO and few others, I wouldn't be able to recognize all of you, but I think some of the customers basically are here in this room as well, and a lot of thanks to them. This is one slide, which is of course, I usually basically say it's the support that we have gathered from all of you, that we could actually show this particular slide, where we have gotten awards in the last 5 years consecutively. We were Cloud Partner of the Year consecutive for the last 2 years, predominantly because of our contribution in the SuccessFactors space, which is the HR talent, which is our prime focus. And of course, I always tell this to my team actually that it is absolutely impossible without your contribution, where they are actually contributing to the customers, and of course the customers and SAP, which can actually recognize it and support us. And hopefully basically I've got a couple of slides next year so that basically the awards don't come in one single slide. Okay. Lastly, there is something that I want to share. This is going to run for about
Manu, maybe, we've been rambling on. Questions, right? Are there questions from people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there things that people are interested in understanding more about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. We are struggling with the HR function.
You're in good company. Okay, so I think our approach to, and you're right, because it's a changing environment. So one of the things you have to be aware of is change fatigue. So one of the things that we're doing is we're bundling our changes into core processes, right? So you lump the changes into windows where you do something, right? Because you don't want to be doing you don't want to be changing something every month. You want to be doing it every 6 months. And you want to contextualize it for people so they understand and they see the value in the change, right? Now, the reality is some of the changes we do for internal convenience. It's focused on making the world easier for the HR function. But usually what we try and do is we say, okay, we're going from here to here, right? So for example, we're a couple of months away from doing our mid-year performance review, but we're bundling a whole set of changes into the performance review. Right, so it's not just, it's a release, and it'll have multiple things that are changed. So we're doing actually changes to EC at the same time, but it all goes live as part of performance review. So it's not a change this month, a change next month, a change the following month. It's a whole bunch of changes at this particular point in time. So I think that becomes more acceptable to people, right? And usually it gives you a basis to explain. You can link things together, right? So and to be honest, that's something you have to live with the cloud, because it is going to be the nature of things, right? There will be continual change.
My advice for customers actually who are from a large perspective adopting HR transformation, and it is a lot of time, let's say 12 to 18 months that you mentioned, I would say that the key to it is actually when you're in the middle of it, try to spend maximum time in the solution design when you're adopting a cloud. Configuration and rollout is very quick. And if you spend, and sometimes it is customers and solution providers get impatient if they maximize the solution design. But trust me, if we maximize the solution design, the configuration is very quick in a cloud, and the rollouts actually will become seamless. And that again, basically as David mentioned, instead of location, do a regional big bang, but do a functionality rollout. I think that will make the process complete, And then you will be able to see and probably do a delta review of next rollout of the same functionality, which didn't work in the beginning, rather than basically doing it. Of course, yeah, I think, yeah.
Other
Yes,
questions?
please.
Maybe would like you to share more about the challenges or the weakness that implementing the cloud system.
Okay. So I think, I mean, and
How you overcome.
sure. So, I mean, the surprise for me in the implementation was actually the amount of dependence on the SI. Okay? I give Manu a hard, I give Manu, from a HR stance, because you rely on the SI to educate HR in terms of how the processes can work and what the capabilities are, right? So I give Manu a hard time, and I have a high expectation of him, so don't get it wrong. This is not always like this, right? So if I see so for me, the biggest learning, right? I mean, I've done Prem before. The biggest learning in doing a cloud implementation, and this is, yes, my first cloud implementation, was the amount of dependency. I felt I had a greater level of dependency on the SI than I've experienced before, right? In doing that. So picking the SI is fundamentally important. In terms of the actual product itself, right? And what do you do differently, right? It was the amount of upstream work that you had to do, right? So upstream work in terms of the standardization, right? And the process mapping and that sort of thing, right? It's heavier than I experienced on-prem because the implementation approach is different, right? So you have to commit and put aside time for the HR function and the HR team to do that. And as Manu said, configuration, actual rollout and UAT testing is relatively short, right? So I think what you have, and you do less, at least from my own experience, you do less iteration because the system doesn't allow you to do things.
Yes.
Right? So you're constrained. You have to do it this way, this way, this way. I can't make the look and feel look like this. It's predefined. I don't spend time creating the look and feel. I can say these are the fields, this is what I want the fields labeled, but the fact that there's 3 fields is fixed. I don't get into that configuration discussion, right? So the effort shifts to the front end and is actually in a way heavier on the HR team than it was because you can configure less, therefore you have less customization to accommodate all the things that you usually do the way you do it in HR. Right? So you have to spend more time at the front end, and the amount of time spent on configuration and rollout actually shrinks because it's much more standard in terms of what you do. That's one. The other thing that was interesting for me, right, is the changing role of IT. Right? Because what does IT now do? You're going outside, the configuration is done by an SI. If you do integrations, yes, you have IT, but to be honest, I mean, I think we're still figuring out how IT is involved in all this, right? We probably have time for one more question, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so you mentioned that with cloud you can go big bang, so you can go by functional. So we're looking at performance management, and we're thinking of phasing it into the sales community as one group before launching out to the rest of the other functions in a sense. What's your views in terms of pros and cons of going as a pilot with sales, for example, first, versus just going one whole big bang for all countries in performance management?
Okay, so when we did it everyone. Okay, we had the discussion around do we bring sales on or not, and at the end of the day, I decided we needed to bring sales on from day one, right? Because sales is your revenue line. And one of your big deliverables for the company has to be the revenue line. But why bring everyone else on at the same time? Because you want to make sure that people are focused and they understand that they have to do things to deliver the revenue line, right? So it's much more powerful. Again, this is about the messaging, because you're doing an implementation to change a mindset and a culture. You want to drive as a company, we need to be aligned. We need to know what the big 5, 6, 7 things are this company needs to do. And I need to be able to take my individual goals and map them up to that, company needs to do this. Now, if you only go with a portion of your organization, basically the message people get, well, it matters for them, but actually I can carry my own
Yes,
thing.
it might not happen.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that works downwards as well as upwards. So, when I do, this is the way we implement performance, this is the way we do goal setting, right? We have the discussion with the board, we define the goals for the company. I then sit with the CEO, he opens up success factors, and we go in for each of his direct reports, and we cascade the goals to the Senior Vice President of Commercial. We cascade it to the VP of R&D, the VP of Clinical and Regulatory. We literally set that and say, how do we break down the goal set that is the company goal set and assign it to each of the CEO's direct reports. And then we tell them, we're done, you go now cascade it. And going through that process sends an incredibly powerful message into the organization that everybody has to be focused on how do we deliver that top 5 or 6 goals. Right? So this is one of the things. You have to think about your implementations not just from a technology and what it means for HR, but what is the messaging you're sending into the organization and how do people in the company experience your implementation? Because at the end of the day, you're implementing something to drive some sort of change. That would be my advice.
Okay, so we come to the last element of it. There is a short description I want to give before I start that. There is a video that we produced recently, which for the new look of our website actually, and it's a conversation between a head of HR and a solution provider. Why I want you guys basically to spend about a couple of minutes to see it is for a very selfish, simple reason. When a producer makes a video or a movie actually, the audience on the first day, he will make it, he will put his money, and he will feel it's going to be a box office hit. But the audience on the first and second day actually will test the waters and say it is good or not. And the fact that he has put in so much money into it, of course, we have not put in a lot of money into it, but I'm taking the example of a Hollywood movie that they've spent millions and millions of it, and the producer knows that he's doing it because he feels that it's going to be a hit. So now, my request is take a look at it. And if you don't feel it is a hit, that's all, you don't have to say anything. If you feel it is good, then our booth is there, you say, the video is good. But of course, it has got a lot of content actually, and it is exactly in the same context of what I and David have been talking, and we have packed it in the 2 minutes. I hope you will like it.
This is Company X. Like most companies, it has a global footprint with lots of different aspects to be solved by different people. Things like employee data, leaves, payroll, time recording, recruitment, talent, employee engagement, and learning are key aspects of the workforce that are solved daily in factories and offices and influence the performance of the whole company. It's easy to make a tangled mess of such a complicated network. That's when senior management has the right idea. Let's call Mr. HR. He'll simplify the HR processes and increase the profitability of the company for sure, right? It may have seemed easy at first, but soon he realizes it's not so. Okay, which solution is right for my business? How can I secure the investment I've already made in HR? Does setting up an HR shared services make sense for my company, or maybe just an HR COE will suffice, along with a few HR business partners? Should we go on cloud or stay on premise? I keep hearing big data for HR everywhere. Would it increase my bottom line? On this social learning thing, can I use it to get employee productivity to skyrocket? Should I start small or go big bang? That's when he comes into play. Mr. Arrays, rolling arrays. Mr. Arrays makes a blueprint of Mr. HR's needs and streamlines HR processes and HR functions and automates them through an HR software with components both on-premise and on the cloud to bring a successful HR transformation in the company. It's world's best HR tailored specifically to Company X's needs, now and in the future. Mr. HR now has some great KPIs to show management. Higher employee productivity, which resulted in high profits. Higher retention due to a better employee engagement process. Lower recruitment costs due to a better succession planning system. And more, from the office To the world, rolling arrays have it covered. Rolling arrays, intelligent system mapping and deployment.